When you reach 91 years old, people begin speaking to you as if your life is already over. They smile politely, they lower their voices, and eventually, they begin discussing where you should spend the rest of your days. Not with cruelty, perhaps, but with that quiet sadness people reserve for the elderly. 3 years ago, after my second fall in the kitchen, my son sat across from me at the dining table and gently suggested a nursing home. He tried to sound careful, kind, responsible, but I still remember how cold the room suddenly felt, because deep inside, I knew what he was truly saying. You cannot live your own life anymore. Now listen carefully to me tonight, because if you are afraid of living alone as you grow older, I beg you, do not rush into surrendering your independence before you understand what loneliness really is. People think nursing homes solve loneliness. Sometimes they simply relocate it. And I know this because I almost went myself. At 88, after my husband passed away, silence entered my home like a heavy winter fog. For the first time in over 40 years, I was sleeping alone. No cough from the other side of the bed, no newspaper rustling in the morning, no voice asking if the kettle had boiled yet. Just silence. And silence can become frightening when grief first arrives, especially at night. People rarely talk honestly about evenings after old age settles in. Daytime is manageable. You distract yourself. You tidy small things unnecessarily. You water plants that do not need watering. You stare out windows longer than before. But nighttime is when loneliness becomes loud. I remember sitting beside the living room lamp one rainy evening, holding a cup of tea gone completely cold. And I thought to myself, perhaps they are right. Perhaps I cannot do this anymore. That is how fear begins. Not dramatically, quietly, one small doubt at a time. A few weeks later, my daughter arranged for me to visit a nursing home nearby. "It's lovely there," she said. "There are activities, people your age, nurses nearby if anything happens." And she meant well, truly. Children become frightened when their parents grow old. I understand that now. They fear phone calls in the middle of the night. They fear accidents. They fear becoming too late. So sometimes they mistake safety for living. The nursing home itself was clean, warm, pleasant enough. The staff smiled kindly. There were flowers near reception. Soft music played quietly somewhere down the corridor. But as I sat there, watching elderly residents staring silently at televisions, something deep inside me began aching. Not because the place was cruel, because it felt like waiting. Waiting for meals, waiting for medication, waiting for visiting hours, waiting for time itself to end. I noticed something else, too. Many of the residents were not physically alone, but emotionally they looked abandoned. One woman sat beside a window, clutching a cardigan tightly in her lap. She stared outside for nearly 20 minutes without speaking. And I remember wondering, what memories was she living inside at that moment? Who did she miss? What parts of herself had quietly disappeared after leaving her home behind? On the drive back, my daughter kept asking gently, "So, what did you think?" But I could barely answer, because something inside me knew, if I moved there too soon, I would slowly stop living before my body was actually ready to stop. Now please understand me carefully. Some people truly need nursing care, and there is no shame in that whatsoever. Life can become physically difficult. Health changes everything. But many people enter those places not because they are incapable of living, but because they are afraid. Afraid of silence, afraid of solitude, afraid of growing old alone. And those fears deserve understanding, not judgment. But tonight, I want to tell you what changed my life completely. Because if you fear living alone, there is something far more important than simply surrounding yourself with people. You must learn the difference between loneliness and disconnection. That lesson saved me. A few days after visiting the nursing home, I found myself sitting in my garden watching birds peck at crumbs near the roses my husband planted years ago. The air smelled faintly of rain, and for the first time in months, I allowed myself to sit quietly without trying to escape my grief. No television, no forced distractions, just stillness. And suddenly, something became painfully clear. I was not truly afraid of living alone. I was afraid of feeling unnecessary. That realization shook me deeply, because many elderly people slowly begin believing their usefulness has expired. Children grow up, friends pass away, society rushes forward without you, and eventually, you begin wondering whether your presence still matters. That feeling is far more dangerous than solitude itself. So instead of moving into the nursing home, I made one small decision, a tiny decision, but it changed everything. I began rebuilding connection instead of surrendering independence. At first, it was simple things, very small things. I started speaking to my neighbours more often. I joined a little reading group at the church hall every Thursday afternoon. I began baking extra scones and delivering them to a widower down the street whose wife had recently died. Then something unexpected happened. Life slowly returned, not dramatically, quietly, like sunlight gradually entering a dark room. One afternoon, a teenage girl from nearby houses began visiting after school because she struggled with anxiety and said my home felt peaceful. Imagine that. At 89 years old, I still had something meaningful to offer another human being. Wisdom, presence, calmness. And perhaps that is what so many elderly people truly need. Not constant supervision, not endless entertainment. Purpose, human connection, feeling emotionally useful again. Now, let me tell you something difficult. Modern life has convinced many people that independence means isolation. But those are not the same thing. You can live alone without living disconnected. And you can be surrounded by people while feeling completely invisible. I have seen both. There was a gentleman in the nursing home I visited named Arthur. His children visited every Sunday faithfully, yet his eyes looked emptier each week. One day I asked him quietly if he enjoyed living there. Do you know what he whispered? "I miss being needed." That sentence stayed with me for years, because purpose keeps the soul alive far longer than comfort ever will. At 91, I have learned that people do not wither simply because they age. They wither when life stops asking anything meaningful from them, and perhaps you listening tonight needed to hear that too. Especially if fear has been whispering to you lately. Fear of aging, fear of being alone, fear of becoming forgotten. please understand, you are not finished simply because your hair turned grey. You are not useless because your body moves slower now. And you are certainly not a burden for needing companionship. But companionship must nourish the soul, not merely occupy the clock. Around this point in my life, I also learned the first great lesson I wish someone had taught me much earlier. Do not abandon your identity just because you grow older. So many elderly people slowly disappear emotionally because they surrender every piece of independence at once. Their routines vanish. Their choices vanish. Even tiny things, like deciding when to make tea or where to sit in the garden, disappear. And those small freedoms matter more than younger people realize. Freedom gives dignity. Please remember that. The second lesson came during winter. One icy evening, the electricity failed across our street for several hours. The house became terribly cold. Years earlier, that situation would have terrified me. But instead, neighbors knocked on one another's doors carrying candles and blankets. We sat together drinking soup by torchlight and laughing over old stories. And I realized something beautiful. Community protects loneliness far better than institutions sometimes can. People need real connection, not simply physical proximity. After that night, several of us older residents began creating small weekly gatherings, tea afternoons, gardening mornings, shared grocery trips. Nothing extraordinary, but slowly we stopped feeling invisible to one another. And perhaps that is what aging truly requires. Not withdrawing from life, but participating differently. Now, somewhere in the middle of all this, my son asked me gently one afternoon, "Mum, are you still frightened at night?" And I answered honestly, "Yes, sometimes." Because courage at 91 does not mean fear disappears. It means you stop allowing fear to make every decision for you. That is an important difference. There are still evenings when grief returns suddenly, moments when the house feels painfully quiet. Sometimes I still reach toward the empty side of the bed before remembering my husband is gone. Loss never fully leaves, but loneliness became much softer once I stopped fighting it so desperately. And that leads me to the third lesson. Do not spend your whole life avoiding discomfort. Some sadness must simply be carried gently, not erased. Modern society tries to remove every uncomfortable feeling immediately. But grief is not a disease. Neither is solitude. Sometimes sitting quietly with your emotions teaches you more about yourself than endless distraction ever could. In those silent evenings, I slowly rediscovered parts of myself I had ignored for decades. I began writing memories from my childhood. I listened to old records again. I planted flowers my husband disliked simply because I finally could. And strangely enough, solitude stopped feeling like punishment. It began feeling peaceful. Not every moment, of course, but enough. Enough to remind me I was still alive, not merely waiting to die. Now, there is one final lesson I want to leave with you tonight, and perhaps it is the most important one of all. Do not let fear make permanent decisions during temporary pain. That is exactly what many people do after loss, after divorce, after illness, after heartbreak. Pain convinces them life will always feel empty. But emotions change slowly over time. Healing arrives quietly. And if I had entered that nursing home during the darkest months after my husband died, I might never have rediscovered myself again. Sometimes, we simply need patience with our own grief, not surrender. At 91 years old, I still wake up each morning and make my own tea. I still sit beside my roses. I still wave to school children passing the gate. I still matter. Not because I am productive, not because I am young, but because every human soul continues mattering while it is alive. Please never forget that, especially if you are growing older and beginning to feel frightened about the future. Yes, one day you may need extra care, perhaps even a nursing home eventually, and there is no shame in that. But before giving away your independence completely, ask yourself honestly, are you truly unable to live alone, or are you simply afraid of feeling emotionally disconnected? Because those are very different things, and one requires medical care, the other requires human connection, purpose, and love. Tonight, wherever you are listening from, perhaps sitting alone yourself, I hope these words reach you gently. You are not invisible. You are not finished. And growing older does not mean your life has stopped having meaning. Sometimes, the world still needs your wisdom more than you realize. If this conversation brought comfort to your heart tonight, subscribe to The Last Lesson for more slow, emotional stories and quiet life lessons from an old soul who has learned that even in old age, there is still beauty left to discover. Until next time, take gentle care of yourself and do not be too quick to give up the life you have already built so lovingly.